what has been the question, what has been the space historically. I think what we've done with old data, which is apparently of some value for this perspective, is give you a sense of what counties look like in Kenya today. And I think what that shows is the legacy of policies and programs and how those have been skewed spatially. You know, you'll see very interesting differences in terms of health outcomes, like for instance, child mortality, maternal mortality, density of health facilities, distance to health facilities, and many other things like poverty and mother's education that we think are important correlates when you start to look at some of these outcomes. And what we're also trying to figure out is what is the space for moving beyond evidence in policy making, to getting policymakers to have some intelligence in the way that they engage with the data. Somebody said that there's so much information, but there's very little knowledge. And I think what we lack is a skill to turn the information into some knowledge and a basis for action. There's not a lack of information, just generally, from all the stuff that we read and what we know about data, and so it's the same thing. There's not a lack of data. There's a lot of data that can do different kinds of things. Not that we have sufficient data to make all the decisions we need, but the data that we have can be put to some use, and that's what we're trying to demonstrate here. So since the last meeting that we had here, we've been looking at the special patterns and understanding the special patterns of inequality in Kenya. Looking at counties, but looking at various dimensions. We have about 46 important variables that we've been looking at. We boiled those down to about 14 that are critical and help explain the differences among the counties. And what we found from our initial analysis is that Kenya is really 5 countries, if you like. We are not the same people, that's for sure. The counties that look very different from the others. And yet we have the same geographic boundary, we hold the same passports, we vote in the same elections, but the outcomes of that political process has not created equitable access to goods and services. So there's a deep basis for governance that we see across the country. And I think this is what the data is showing. The problem is that these things have not informed the political conversation. So the politics is on another thing. The people who should be complaining and kicking and are kicking for different reasons. They're not kicking around they're not asking why do our mothers have to die just because they wanted to have a child. They're not asking questions like why do kids drop out of school at numbers that are atrocious. Those are not the questions that are informing the political process. So what we also expect to do with data is to drive the political conversation to something that is more meaningful to Kenyans. That becomes about me. What have you done for me lately? And I think that's what is going to help diminish the divisive nature of the politics that is now along along ethnic lines. But what is also interesting is that if you look at the structure, the spatial structure of the inequality, and you throw in a bit of historical perspective, and you look at the political cleavages across the county, across the country, over time from 1961 to date, there's a very strange coincidence around some of the outcomes, except for places like Baringo, where Mr. Moi was president for 24 years, but there's no difference. But if you look at the politics and the outcomes around some of these important indicators of well-being, it tells you something, that there's something broken and fundamentally skewed about our politics. And that the conversation ought to go there, and do counties then provide an interesting opportunity for us to begin to course correct some of these problematic patterns. And then what we're also trying to do with the data, for instance, what Caleb will show is that there's a sub-county in Kiambu that has worse child and maternal outcomes than the average in Turkana. Now the question is why? So you'll be sitting around here and you're thinking the central Kenya is all glory and that. No. There are serious problems and inequalities within the county. And I think what we want to do is how do we get to the sub-county level and then get the conversation around equalization, the same conversation we're having at the national level around equitable sharing of resources should go to the counties. Okay? So that MCAs are now asking the same questions that senators ought to be asking about distribution of the national cake. And this, for us, is a much more interesting conversation than all this useless noise that we make at the national level. We should go to the counties and say, can we hold this promise of devolution can we hold the feet of that, the foot of that promise to the fire and let it stand the test that resources must now flow to the people in the grassroots. And then governors must be held to the same standard that you're trying to hold Mr. Kenyatta to. That when you're making noise about corruption at the national level, you should be asking what your governor has done with the money lately. So it's to try and change the structure of the conversation so that this national nonsense of what we're having now should now go, the pressure should go back to the county because that's what Kenyans call machinery. So what I would like to do now is to have Caleb show us two types of products that we've created that help to frame the conversation. So the first one is really at a snapshot, how do counties stack up? So we're going to look at some key health variables and show you what they look like at a county level. And it begins to kind of shift the question of why are these outcomes. So we want to see what kinds of questions do these things raise in your mind, and what further questions would you like to ask. And some of the things that we're seeing is causing us to ask very different kinds of questions. Like for instance, if I asked you just generally what would drive child mortality, you'd give me all kinds of things. But we'll show you data that is counterintuitive to your hunch, that gets you thinking about what the hell is going on here. Where in places where you have great access to skilled birth attendants, you have high health facility densities, you have really short distances, you have high levels of mothers' literacy, and you have generally higher levels of income. They're not great, but they're slightly above national average. But you have atrocious child mortality numbers there. Yet in other places, where all these things are completely off, you have very low infant mortality. And then the question we should ask is, what else drives these numbers? And what kinds of questions, if we go back to these counties, then should we ask what really is happening here? And what we're asking is the model of health programming really up to scratch? You know, there's some things that we're glossing over, there's some things that we don't understand about the structure of the data. And from the perspective of people who are writing and people who are reading and people who are in research around these things, what we want to create is a tool that really goes under the skin of the data and causes you to ask different questions. One of the things we want to frame is, for instance, what are those kind of critical sets of correlates that would help predict child mortality, for instance, if you look at it from point. And then how do you use this to assemble some kind of a credible pathway to delivering these programs? So that if you go into an area, you're not just going with a bag of vaccines and refrigeration, and you're not just throwing in skilled birth attendants, but you begin to understand the entire frame of what determines those outcomes. And then that causes health practitioners then to figure out how they're going to, who else do they need to partner with. So it's not about data being a basis for creating important partnerships in terms of implementation, and also creating an opportunity and a pathway for cross-conversations across different disciplinary domains. When you look at, say, the disease burden, for instance, that's all kinds of things in there. You can throw in mosquito bed nets and insect-treated nets, etc. But sometimes it is about mothers' literacy. Another good example is education outcomes, especially who benefits from free primary education. The kids who are too poor to even show up in school. And some of the work that we've looked at, say, Tuaweza work, shows that mothers' literacy actually is a very good predictor of numeracy and literacy at an early age. So you can make education free whatever you want. But as long as mothers are illiterate, you don't see those outcomes in that investment. So again, what does it then cause policymakers to think about? Should you then bundle free primary education with adult literacy for the same mothers who have school-going age kids? This is what the data is beginning to kick out, to say, can we ask different questions about data? Can we ask different questions about implementation structures? Can we ask different data about policy? Because I think that policy is really a series of development hypotheses. They're not certain in many ways. They're experiments that we should try out, but we should also treat them with a lot of caution. It doesn't mean that because a government is implementing a certain policy, then it means that those outcomes are going to be as planned. But how do we step back and be more humble about the possibilities of our policies delivering the outcomes that we intend? So without saying much, I would like Caleb to come and just give you a sense of the data and the kinds of questions that you might ask of it. It's still under a lot of development, and part of it is also to see what kinds of questions would you be interested in. Because the data is supposed to be the portal and the dashboard, which we're calling it a policy dashboard, which gives you the intelligence behind the data, is supposed to be something that responds to the questions that you want to ask and things you want to find out from the data. And therefore, we're, in a sense, kind of trying to crowdsource what are the possibilities and interests that you may have so that we actually improve the interface. So I'll give it to Caleb to go over the data, but it's interactive, so feel free to stop him and ask questions. We can try out a few things with the data. You can ask us to, say, model in a certain way and see what outcomes come out of it. Do you have a mic? Or he was supposed to... He can use it, but he needs his hands. So you need to give him that so that he needs something hands-free. Is this?
Yeah, so as Alex has given us a very good introduction of what is going on here, this is the second time we're here looking at the inequalities that happen and how then we can use data as a basis for competing. And so IBP has been partnering with us in our first meeting. Jason was there with us, and lots went on. And we are soldiering on to work together with them in this area. Now, as you can see in the program, so now if I speak, I'm being heard. Yeah, so, but there's still a bit of interference. I don't know where that is from. Yeah, so as I was saying, if you look at the program, today we are talking about launching the portal that we have been working on. But as Alec has already said, when we look at inequalities and how then we can use data to be able to use it as a basis for projecting ideas, we are realizing that it is pretty complex, and many things need to be put together. And as he has rightly said that, you know, portals that do not respond to needs is as good as not useful. And so one of the things we are trying to do is that we will try to use platforms like this whenever they become available as a basis for interacting with those who will eventually use our portal. And so let me start by coming here. This is a portal that we have been working on. There are several sides to this portal. I mean, the first side is just about literature and stories and basically what we have been able to find out. And also there are a lot of other materials that we have been using to put together this portal. If you go to the library section and downloads, there will be a lot of material that you can pull from there. But as you can see, there are so many things that we have been able to find out from this portal. And so, sorry, it just went off. It takes a long time to download because the files are very heavy. So this is our first portal. This is the first one that we are having, and this is, you can go to different sections and you can be able to get what you're looking for. Yeah, but the part that particularly concerns this discussion is a part here where we are talking about the various parameters that we thought would be reasonable for determining the outcomes of. See that we are not just in